早上好，你好吗? Good morning from Jakarta, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to all participants ASEAN-China Policy Lab. So we gathered here today for ASEAN-China Policy Lab titled Filling in the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership. I'm excited to welcome all participants who are joining us virtually from all around the region. I'm excited to welcome participants who are joining us in this Zoom and those who are turning in from YouTube. I'm Brigitta Manohara, who are joining us. Will be the MC for this opening ceremony this morning, and it is my honor to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Teng Chi-chun, Ambassador of the People Republic of China of ASEAN. Welcome, Mr. Ambassador. Ni hao. Hopefully you're something很好. So I'm also would like to greet founder Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia, Dr. Dino Patijalal, all speakers and also moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia, FPCI, is pleased to co-convene the ASEAN-China Policy Lab in cooperation with the mission of the People's Republic of China to ASEAN. The ASEAN-China Policy Lab is a 2-day virtual conference that gathers selected 20 students from 10 Asian countries. The 20 selected students are the 20 winners of the Youth Voice for ASEAN-China Cooperation Writing Competition, which is a region-wide essay writing competition participated by both undergraduate and graduate students. These 20 participants will discuss the past, present, and future direction of the ASEAN-China relationship, namely on the China-ASEAN Comprehensive Strategic Partnership, or GSP. After 2 days of intensive discussion and dialogue, the ASEAN-China Policy Lab will produce a youth-led joint recommendation on how to fill in the comprehensive strategic partnership. So before we start, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to remind all participants who is joining from Zoom to open their camera once again and use the ASEAN-China Policy Lab background that has been provided by the committee. And please make sure that you are always on mute when you are not given the floor to speak. So without further ado, to officially open today's Policy Lab, I would like to invite Dr. Dino Patijalal, founder of Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia, to give his opening remark. So to Dr. Dino Patijalal, the floor is yours. Here they are, Mr. Dino.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And I want to welcome everybody and congratulate everybody who's won the Policy Lab competition. And you deserve to be here. And we look forward to hearing what you have to contribute your ideas. And I want to thank Ambassador Deng Xijun and China's mission to ASEAN for the friendship and collaboration with FPCI. ASEAN and China last year entered a new chapter of comprehensive strategic partnership. So now it's quite a milestone event because for ASEAN, China is one of our most important partners, politically, economically, and also strategically. So the question now is what happens next after the CSP? How do we make it work and relevant and a living force in Southeast Asia and for the region? And to answer these questions, FPCI is collaborating with the China mission to convene a region-wide essay competition. 524 participants took part, but we have 20 of the best winners. And ASEAN-China Policy Lab is a platform for ASEAN youth to learn, discuss, and practice policymaking process and issues between ASEAN and China. And later they will produce a youth-led joint recommendation, which will answer the theme of the program. And more than that, we will have ASEAN-China Youth Dialogue, which is a very special program where China's youth and ASEAN youth will have their dialogue. And I hope this program will be useful and to everybody and will enhance mutual understanding. So let me just use this opportunity to encourage all the participants that this is not just a learning process, but also a forum to connect and exercise your analytical writing and speaking skills. Thank you very much, and all the best to you. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Dinopati Jalal, as a founder of Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia. It is a great opening remark from you, Shesheni. This is China's speak. Thanks for your speech. So next, we will have opening remarks from His Excellency, Mr. Chen Qichun, Ambassador of the People's Republic of China to ASEAN. So for Mr. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Your Excellency, Dr. Dinopati Jalal, Chairman of Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia. Young friends, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's a pleasure to attend this policy lab and meet with all the young friends present. As a continuation of the Youth Voice for China-ASEAN Cooperation Writing Competition, this policy lab brings together outstanding young talents from the competition to explore ideas for the development of China-ASEAN relations, which is not only innovative in form, but also highly relevant. As President Xi Jinping said, the future belongs to the young people, and the hopes also rest with them. The support and the participation of youth from both sides are the future and the hope for the development of China-ASEAN relations. China and ASEAN are linked by mountains and rivers, as well as hearts and aspirations. We are always good neighbors, good friends, and good partners with a shared future. Last November, President Xi Jinping and ASEAN leaders attended the special summit to commemorate the 30th anniversary of China-ASEAN dialogue relations and formally announced the establishment of China-ASEAN Comprehensive Strategic Partnership. President Xi also put forward the important initiative of building a peaceful, safe and secure, prosperous, beautiful, and amicable home together, pointing the way forward for the implementation of the CSP. In nearly a year since then, the China-ASEAN CSP has gotten off to a strong start and gained momentum, and significant achievements have been made in the building of the 5 homes. First, political mutual trust has been deepened. The two sides have maintained close high-level strategic communication, formulated the plan of action for the CSP, jointly commemorated the 20th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration on the Conduct of Parties in the South China Sea, and actively advanced the consultations on the Code of Conduct in the South China Sea, making joint efforts to build an even closer China-ASEAN community with a shared future. China also proposed the Global Security Initiative, which has received positive responses from most of ASEAN countries. Second, common development has achieved remarkable results. The two sides have successfully promoted the launch and implementation of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, continue to build greater synergy between development strategies, actively carried out activities of the Year of Sustainable Development Cooperation, and cooperated to address urgent challenges in the fields of public health, food, and energy. China is stepping up efforts to honor its commitment to providing development assistance for ASEAN countries and push forward the implementation of the Global Development Initiative with ASEAN countries. Third, connectivity has continued to deepen. The two sides have joined hands to promote high-quality Belt and Road cooperation, maintain the safety and smooth flow of industrial and supply chains, promoted the work toward a new round of upgrade of the China-ASEAN Free Trade Area, expanded cooperation in digital, green, and other emerging areas, and promoted open regional economic integration. The two sides have also overcome the impact of the pandemic and gradually resumed direct flights and people-to-people exchanges to jointly promote post-pandemic economic recovery. Fourth, collaboration on global governance has been strengthened. Both sides agreed to uphold open regionalism, promote real multilateralism, and contribute Asian solutions and Asian strengths to the world. China unequivocally supports the ASEAN-centered regional cooperation architecture and expresses its willingness to enhance the synergy between the Belt and Road Initiative and the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific, as well as between the GDI and the AOIP, which is warmly welcomed by ASEAN member states. Young friends, China-ASEAN CSP has achieved positive results, but there are still broader prospects which need us to explore and develop. At the same time, the world today is not short of rivalries between openness and isolation, cooperation and confrontation, solidarity and division, progress and regression, and the external environment for the development of China-ASEAN relations is still full of challenges. How to grasp the opportunities and address the challenges is a question we should keep thinking about. Before attending today's policy lab, I read several outstanding essays of the writing competition, and I'm very pleased to see that ASEAN youth could objectively and rationally analyze the opportunities and the challenges in the development of China-ASEAN relations and put forward constructive and innovative concrete proposals. I hope that on this basis, you can use the policy lab as a new opportunity to have a deeper understanding of the China-ASEAN CSP and communicate and exchange ideas for more innovative insights so as to contribute your wisdom and strengths to the development of China-ASEAN relations. In this regard, I would like to share with you a few of my thoughts. First, I hope you could focus on cooperation. Cooperation is the key word of the China-ASEAN CSP. How to continue to make the pie of cooperation bigger. How to make the fruits of cooperation better benefit people of both sides. How can China and ASEAN contribute to addressing global challenges through cooperation? I look forward to more views and ideas from you. Second, I hope you could be bold and innovative. The strength of youth lies in imagination and innovation. If the China-ASEAN CSP is to be stable and far-reaching, we must enhance our foresight, constantly explore new areas of cooperation, and create new cooperation highlights. I hope you will break the traditional mindsets and put forward your views and suggestions freely. Third, I hope you could learn from each other. You come from different ASEAN countries and have different cultural backgrounds and values. The Chinese students who will engage in exchanges and dialogues with you will also have their own opinions and ideas. I hope you will respect each other, listen to each other, and find consensus in the common pursuit of China-ASEAN friendship. Finally, I wish you all have an enjoyable and fulfilling time in the upcoming discussions and wish the Policy Lab a great success. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Excellency, for your insightful opening remarks. 感谢您富有洞察力的开场白，谢谢您已经使用 batik. Thank you for wearing batik also, Mr. Ambassador. Hopefully I spell rightly because I'm learning Chinese a little. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, once again. So we will move to our next agenda, ladies and gentlemen, which is experts panel discussion on ASEAN-China political security cooperation. So I'm pleased to welcome and introduce our three speakers that will be speaking and sharing their insights today. First, we have Dato Abdul Majid, President of Malaysia-China Friendship Association, who is joining us today. Hi, Dato, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
How is Malaysia? Is it great?
Oh, hot and raining.
Oh, hot and raining, just like Jakarta, right? Okay, so the second one, I have Lucio Blanco Pitlo III, Research Fellow at the Asia Pacific Pathways to Progress Foundation. Hi, Lucio, morning. How are you? Are you great?
Good morning. I'm good. Cloudy in Manila.
Oh, cloudy in Manila. Hopefully you are great and still strong and healthy, of course. And the last but not least, Aristyo Rizka Darmawan, lecturer in international law at Universitas Indonesia. This is my college. Aristyo, hi.
Good morning, Mbak Brita. How are you? Very good to see you.
Hi.
And
Akhirnya ketemu di
oh, I'm
sini.
greeting from yeah.
Nggak ketemu di kampus, ketemunya di sini. So this is
Very good to
all
see you. You have
our
a very good
speakers.
Chinese.
Yeah, a little Chinese. Hopefully, I made no mistake to spell it. So this is all speakers, ladies and gentlemen. Our discussion today will be moderated by Director of Research and Analysis of FPCI, Calvin Koy. We will join and moderate. This is Calvin. Hi, Calvin.
Hello, Mbak Brigita.
You
How are
great?
you? Very well. Looking your excitement makes me more excited.
Have you eaten your breakfast? So you will
That's the
be
thing.
more
I have
excited
not.
to moderate our discussion today?
I have not. That's the thing. You need to, buy me some things after this.
Okay, I will send to your office. So, without further ado, I will now pass the floor to Calvin. So, Calvin, the floor is yours to moderate this discussion.
Thank you. Chawan Ambassador, thank you for having be with us here in a very good day to discuss about ASEAN-China relationship. By the way, hello again. My name is Calvin Ko. I'm the co-director of Research Analysis, and I'll be serving as your moderator. Again, welcome to the Political Security Panel. As a part of ASEAN-China Policy Lab, the theme of the program is filling in the comprehensive strategic partnership. I would also to congratulate again the 20 selected Southeast Asian students. Let's give a big hand to each of them because you managed to get in, and I suggest you and encourage you to make the best of this panel's expert by asking questions later on. This session will last for 90 minutes, which will be divided by a panel discussions and Q&A sessions with the students. I personally have been closely watching the relationship in the past 2 years as myself as the program coordinator and analyst to the ASEAN-China survey. I think the relationship between ASEAN and China is definitely strategic and condensed with substantive cooperations in all aspects, particularly on economy and development. Yet, we cannot ignore the fact that the political and security of ASEAN and China is so dynamic. As the study of the survey, FPCI research survey on ASEAN and China, we found out that the political and security aspect always received the most least satisfactory from the Southeast Asian respondents. Thus, I personally like to define the relationship of ASEAN and China has a characteristic of compartmentalizations. What does it mean? Compartmentalization, I take it as an acknowledgement of ASEAN and China, that there are parts of the relationship which is good and very progressive and productive. However, there are also parts of the relationship which needs to be talked more, needs to be discussed more, and needs to be developed more. So we manage to compartment different aspects of the relationship, and everything is going simultaneously and always open a dialogue of communications, which is good in my observations. As we know, last year, ASEAN and China commemorated the 30th anniversary of the relationship, and last year's summit was highlighted with announcements of the comprehensive strategic partnership between ASEAN and China. And I noted President Xi participations last year is indications of a strong commitment of China to the region. So today, I'm not alone. My first questions after I heard about the CSP at the time was about how will the CSP make the difference way forward, particularly our political security relationship. Today, we have a very distinguished speakers as the MC has introduced, that Abdul, Majid, Lucio, and Aristyo. Welcome to the panel. Thank you for each of you. Now, I want to start with the first round of questions, which everybody I invite you to answer. The question is simple. How do you perceive the newly announced CSP and between ASEAN and China, and how it will make the difference approach to the state of ASEAN-China political security relationship? I want to go to Aristyo and then to Lucio and Dato for the last speakers. Aristyo, you have 5 minutes.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much, Kelvin. Also, distinguished Ambassador Hasim Jalal and Ambassador Deng. It's a really pleasure to join this very insightful panels. And of course, I think I would like to join Kelvin and all of the previous speakers in congratulating all of the participants for winning the ASA competition. I think it's very selective. I heard it's around 600 students apply and 20 of you get selected. So I think it's a remarkable achievement. I think so you can do a lot of things after this event, I think. So I think in the short remarks, I want to make 3 points. Opportunities that we have with the ASEAN and China relations. And the second is what are the challenge, and the third is how we can going forward with the comprehensive strategic partnerships between ASEAN and China. First, I think with regards to the opportunities, I think in the last 10 years or so, I think I do share the same thoughts and beliefs with other scholars and also analysts, which argue that the 21st century is very much going to be the Asian centuries, as what Kishore Mahbubani, Parakhana, and other scholars I would argue that within the Asian century, ASEAN-China relations is very much driven and important, and how ASEAN-China relations can driven how the Asian century is going to be look like. So basically, the ASEAN-China relation is very much important in the last few years, also in the upcoming years to come. So how we manage the relationships, in particular the security relationship, also the key for a successful Asian century. I think in the last few years, we've witnessed on how ASEAN and China have a lot of ups and downs in terms of relationships. I think a lot of survey from Southeast Asia countries still see that China has a lot of opportunities here. And of course, it's also one of the most significant countries here in Southeast Asia in terms of economic partnerships, and also with the One Belt and Road Initiative, and a lot of projects that both countries, I think all ASEAN and also China, get benefit from the cooperation. So I think there has been a lot of opportunities out there. There has been a lot of modalities that we can explore between ASEAN and China in order to get the shared benefit of this cooperation. However, I think we also have to admit that there has been a lot of challenge in the last few years, which I think it might affect on how the ASEAN and China cooperation is going forward. There has been several hotspot or conflict that exists now. I think one of it's the South China Sea dispute. The other is Mekong River, and also several other, I think, issues that's still pending between ASEAN and China. And deal with important in determining how the ASEAN and China going forward. I think if we go through the document of the CSO, I think it's a really good document. I think it's quite comprehensive. It touches upon the fundamental issues that we have. It recognizes a lot of the opportunities that ASEAN and China have, but also it touches upon several important notes of how the ASEAN and China going forward. For example, it's explicitly recognized some of the problems of the South China Sea dispute, for example. But then also, I think it's really great that in the CSO document, it underlines very important of how ASEAN and China relationships should going forward, which is the importance of the rule of international law. I think if we want to see a successful relationships between ASEAN and China, I think the rule of international law, it should be regarded as an important, and it's the basic argument and to conduct the relationship with. I think the document itself explicitly mentioned that all parties should respect the United Nations Conventions on the Law of the Sea as the basis of building relationships between two countries. And also, I think it's really great that the CSO mentions that both parties acknowledge the importance for ASEAN and China to build a code of conduct to assure the problems will not escalate. So I think build on what the ambassador has said earlier, I think the key, of course, in regards to have a successful ASEAN and China relations is cooperations. I think hotspots, it's everywhere around the world, but what most important is how we dealing, how we manage the conflicts, and how we still going forward with the conflict. So collaborations and cooperation, I think it's really the key message. So I think the CSO should be an important document for several of reasons. First, it highlighted the importance and it touched upon the commitment of respecting the rule of international law. It touched upon dealing and strength of conduct. So, and I think it really built upon the trust and confidence building between ASEAN and also China. So I think indeed the challenge is there, but the CSO and the commitment of ASEAN and China going forward in terms of the relationship, I think it's the biggest modality on how we can going forward with the relationship. So I'm going to be stopping there, Calvin. I'm very much looking forward to further discussions with all the participants. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aristyo. By the way, we received quite a bad signal from you. I think if you can turn off your camera, but we can still hear your voice. By the way, thanks a lot, Aristyo. I think you highlighted the interesting statement that how do we manage the disputes? I think that's important. A lot of hotspots around the world, but how we deal it, how we approach it, and how we keep moving forward is very important. Now, I want to hear from the Philippines perspective. Lucio, please.
Warm greetings from Manila. Thank you, Calvin. Terima kasih. Pleasure to join this morning panel. Good morning to Ambassador Jalal, to Ambassador Dong. Thank you for organizing this very timely conversation, and congratulations again to the participants of the ASEAN-China Policy Lab. Of course, you'll be making a very good contribution to fostering better relations between the two sides. And of course, because you hold the future, as Ambassador Zhang said, there's a lot to be said about what you can do in terms of improving ties between ASEAN and China. And so I wish you the best, and I hope this morning's discussion and your engagement with the Policy Lab will contribute in investing for your future. So the ASEAN-China Comprehensive Strategic Partnership is, of course, a very important document. And I think political security relations is the most underdeveloped of the different sets of ASEAN-China ties. And so the CSP gives a sense of where both sides are in terms of, for instance, political security. So it gives a sense of hierarchy. Of course, it's the second to the top in terms of China's partnership diplomacy, the pinnacle of which is, of course, the strategic cooperative partnership. And so CSP suggests that there is a lot of scope, a lot of room to improve relations between the two sides, especially on the field of politics and security. So there's, of course, there's invocation, there's call to intensify exchanges and activities on the political security field, because the other fields are doing a lot, especially economics, activity, and so on. So I think, again, there's a lot of space to improve from where we are right now in terms of the political security pillar of the relations between ASEAN and China. Trust, of course, remains an issue. Of course, long-standing disputes in the South China Sea is still, but of course, there's also an opportunity to that. There's a need for more confidence building between both sides. And of course, one potential silver lining is, of course, the drawdown in COVID-19, the easing of restrictions on travel may make more in-person diplomacy, intimate discussion on sensitive issues, like China's. So there might be diplomatic engagement, physical, with high-level officials of both sides to try to find a way to manage, if not resolve this long-standing flashpoint. And next year, Indonesia will be the rotating host of ASEAN, and of course, the maritime issues may, of course, be given the importance due to it. But there's a lot of scope for cooperation between ASEAN and China on the security field, especially in addressing non-traditional security threats. Of course, the Philippine President Marcos, in his speech before the General Assembly recently, last month, spoke about climate change and how it transcends differences between countries. This is a challenge for mankind, especially for a country facing the Pacific Ocean, really weathering more stronger typhoons and unpredictable weather patterns. So of course, it's a challenge for not only for the Philippines, but for the rest of ASEAN as well as China. And so this provides a platform for both sides to come to terms and cooperate, to find a way to address climate change. Initiative, the move to shift funding away from coal projects to funding more green, sustainable energy like wind, solar, and hydro. This will contribute a lot to climate change mitigation. Beyond that, of course, there's a scope for search and rescue, humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, cooperation, including in the South China Sea, especially providing assistance to fishermen caught in inclement weather. Of course, anti-piracy cooperation, possibly in the Strait of Malacca or even in the Sulawesi Sea, where the Philippines, Malaysia, and Indonesia have existing trilateral air and maritime patrols to address sea robbery and kidnappings at sea. So I think there's a scope for cooperation between China and ASEAN in these spaces. And of course, recently, China mentioned, announced this initiative called the Global Security Initiative. It will be interesting to look at potential confluence and overlaps between the GSI and, of course, ASEAN's aspiration to invest in its political security pillar. So I'll probably stop there, and I look forward to the discussion with the rest of the panelists, Aristyo and Dato, Majid, pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucio. You touch a lot of aspects, and I think you also gave a lot of good examples, and you also touch a bit about the GSI and GDI. I think we can discuss that later. Now, I want to hear from Malaysian perspective, and as also as a former ambassador to China, Dato, please share your opinion. How do you see it, please?
Thank you, Pak Kevin. First of all, good morning to Dr. Dino, Ambassador Dang, and also I'd like to congratulate FPCI for actually inviting the young talent to be part of this very strategic deliberation. I think it's a very innovative idea since we know that ASEAN-China youth cooperation is part of our agenda, and of course the youth are the leaders. So I think this is a very good move. I'd like to directly touch on your question. I think I'd like to just share with you 3 points. One, I think on the overall ASEAN-China relationship, I think we should actually telescope actually the history part of it. After 30 years, we have reached a stage where I think strong elements of confidence and trust have been built into the two sides. Why I say this? Because when we first started the dialogue 30 years ago, there was a lot of mistrust and actually suspicious on both sides. The Chinese were not sure about what ASEAN is. Is it a Trojan horse for other powers? And for ASEAN, we are really not sure of the new direction of the Chinese policy. But because of the hard work of official leaders over the years, we've been able to actually brought the two sides together. And last year, we have come to a stage of having a comprehensive strategic partnership. This is a big move, and also it reflects the success of both ASEAN and China, how we manage our relationship with each other, especially for ASEAN, how we manage a big neighbor with all the resources and all the assets they have. We do not want to be actually in other parts of the world where neighboring countries are not able to take into sensitivity of each other, then you have conflict, So I think ASEAN has done well. And secondly, I think we have to ask ourselves, what is the objective of having all this mechanism, regional cooperation? I think is to achieve peace, stability, and development for the region. And secondly, also to build trust, confidence as a result of the legacy of the Cold War. So if you look from that point of view, I think we have done well, both Malaysia and both China and ASEAN. And I think this is a very precious asset to me, to both ASEAN and China. And the moment forward is actually to deepen the engagement, to really study. I think China has come out, with very fresh proposals, in not only reaffirming many of the pillars of ASEAN principle of cooperation on sovereignty, on respect, also on deeper economic development, given China's own, capability, but also, throwing in on the larger global governance regarding development, regarding also security. These are some fresh ideas that actually ASEAN should study. And I think for ASEAN, in looking at this, forward movement of deepening ASEAN-China relations, especially on the strategic and political side, I think we still be guided by 2 or 3 principles. First, of course, the principle is what is beneficial to ASEAN, or what is mutually beneficial for ASEAN and China. Secondly, we need to put into context the balanced approach. We have other dialogue partners, so we should not actually alienate other dialogue partners or give the impression of a very unbalanced approach. I think this has been part of the guiding principle of ASEAN. And thirdly, also our own comfort level, because we study the progress for the last 30 years of the dialogue. It's all about comfort level of either sides, especially the ASEAN side. I remember I was part of the eminent person ASEAN-China eminent person group of 2005 that was supposed to put a vision of 2005 to 2015 China-ASEAN relations. So that was one of the first dialogue we have, how to shape future ASEAN relations. From there you can see, the mistrust, the suspicion was there. ASEAN was more actually on the holding back, whereas China seems to be quite ready with many ideas. I remember one of the ideas, even at that stage, China gave a proposal, ASEAN-China Defense Minister meeting. Of course, ASEAN was not ready at that time, but we do not totally reject it out. We did mention on how comfortable ASEAN are with the bilateral as well as the multilateral relationship. But I think all this now has come to a stage where we can now move to another stage of development. And this, I think, I like to caution, especially for the young. When we developed the ASEAN-China relation 30 years ago, the international environment was different. In fact, it was, to overcome the legacy of the Cold War. There was all around, happy or positive move or mood of international cooperation. That's how we've been able to develop this mechanism very well. But today, I think the geopolitical tension, particularly the rivalry between the US and China, will actually, for the next 10 to 15 years, will actually, determine the shape of cooperation or the management that we are to put in on both sides. This is something that we have to bear in mind. So the new challenges that we face in trying to shape a new relationship or to deepen the relationship given a different external environment for the last 30 years. This could be one of the challenges. But I think the idea is, first, is that we have to continue to build up the trust, that we have the foundation. And I think for our Chinese side, they need to be sensitive. While I think relationship has been positive, there are elements of fear, element of suspicion in many of the ASEAN countries among not the whole government, but certain sectors. This is something I think maybe the Chinese side can address. Certain sectors are still not sure of Chinese policy, are still not convinced. This I think the Chinese side could do by having a very selected seminar directed towards these sectors of group people. I remember when I was ambassador to China in the 1990s, we wanted to open up Chinese tourists to Malaysia, but we had difficulty, internal resistance by the bureaucracy. We invited officials from all this bureaucracy to visit China, a tour of China, to show to them China has really opened, China has changed, China has, all this development. It's something different China from what we conceive in the early 60s or even early 70s. So this educate, created an awareness of what's happening in China. So I think, China has done, all the achievement, there are a lot of material on it, but I think there's nothing more than to have people visit China itself to witness. So this can create the awareness that China has a positive role to play regionally, which China has shown, for example, on the COVID-19, and sharing of, opening up Chinese market, and also China's own, policy or initiative of the ASEAN-China Free Trade Zone, and many of the new proposals that China has come out in the last 1 or 2 years to reshape global governance and also to bring about greater cooperation. So to me, going forward, the challenges is actually how to actually fade away some of the remaining fear challenges that we have, so that actually some of the very good ideas as emphasizing on cooperation, because only through cooperation we can maximize synergy of both sides, especially for ASEAN. China has a lot to offer in terms of technology, in terms of capital, in terms of resources, which China have done in terms of investment in ASEAN. This is something that we can capitalize, because I think for all people in the world, for the people level, what we want is actually development. What we want is peace and stability, because without this basic fundamental, then I think we cannot move forward. So I think, in a nutshell, I think it's the right move to deepen, to engage our dialogue with China. There are a lot of proposals that we can study, but of course for ASEAN, there are other basic principles we need to consider in trying to embrace this proposal and to move forward. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dato. Dato, a bit of follow-up questions to you directly. You raised an important 3 principles. I think it's very interesting to dive in more. Can you elaborate more on the three principles, in particular in the context how we approach the hot spots of South China Sea and also on the Mekong River, for instance? How do we approach this through the principles that you just raised?
I think basically we have to look actually at this potential conflict and all that, not to escalate it, because the other party is actually China. It's a very close neighbor. We cannot choose our neighbor. We have to take into consideration of both sides, and also we hope China will take into account the feeling of ASEAN, and China also should think. China should realize why smaller countries are fearful of big country. This is only natural, because the asymmetry. Because China, in terms of population, in terms of resources, in terms of capacity, is so far different with even individual ASEAN country in the whole group. So you cannot actually deny this fear. So I think in solving the issue, as you mentioned, South China Sea and also the Mekong thing, we have to really look in the interest of both sides. Never allow it to escalate into a conflict. So I think here we must have actually really professional diplomats. Our negotiators has to look actually, because once conflict has started, it's very difficult to control. And I think we should always tell, especially among the youngs, that will take over, that never go into a war conflict, because you can see refugees, people who has established life in their own country have to run away, to abandon their home. We have seen this all over the world now. So ASEAN should prevent. And I think this is the achievement of ASEAN. We have done this, 30 years. Within ourselves, we have some conflict, but managed through the leadership of our diplomats, throughout our leaders. And I think now we are with our neighbors, so it is something that we must, from day one, objective is to manage the conflict and maybe to work out something taking into account sensitivity of both sides.
Thank you. I don't know whether Lucio shares the same opinion with Dato. What do you think? Same questions, Lucio.
Well, I would agree to Ambassador Majid that Ambassador Dato. If you cannot resolve dispute, might as well not aggravate. So, of course, the sovereignty, territorial, maritime issues are always sensitive. No political leadership will expend, their enormous, their political capital, to they need to show resolve, to their domestic people that they're doing their job to protect the country's national interests. So there needs to be some kind of understanding, modus vivendi, a way for all parties to, whether it's the South China Sea or the Mekong River, the water usage there, to coexist peacefully, to be able to access the resources, especially access to marine resources, for instance, in the South China Sea, sticking point in relations between ASEAN claimant states and that of China. So I think there needs to be some kind of accommodation, some kind of understanding between parties to a dispute on how to address incidents. If they come about, try to prevent incidents first, from happening, and if they happen, need to have crisis management mechanisms. How do you try to make sure that an incident will not reach crisis, where leadership of both sides will be forced to take assertive measures to suit the domestic nationalist sentiments. So avoiding reaching that point is crucial, and it's really salute hard work for diplomats to really go out to prevent that. And if it ever reached to the proportion, there's a crisis already, that climbing down from that situation, making sure it would not escalate any further. Again, the job of leadership, political leadership of parties to the dispute, the diplomats, and as well as the security sector, of the parties involved. So again, these are difficult conversations, because they are very sensitive and difficult issues. So they really require not knee-jerk responses, no, but really thoughtful and really calibrated approaches.
Thank you, Lucio. I want to move the needles to Aristyo, but a bit different. So Aristyo, you raised before the international rule of law is the key to the relationship ASEAN and China. And then Dato raised about the three principles to approach. It's a very interesting two sides of point of view from the legal perspective, where you are expert with, and also from Dato that has a very esteemed experience on approaching in a diplomatic way. So how do you see it in these two sides of approach in the international regulations, and also the three approaches which is coming out from how we used to be in a custom relationship between ASEAN and China? Aristyo.
Right, thank you. But before, I think if I may, a little bit echoes what Ambassador Dato already said. I think I tremendously agree with what Ambassador Dato has said. That I think to create build a trust between ASEAN and China, there should be a line of communications, because there has been a lot of issues out there. There's been a lot of headlines, and sometimes it's also a misleading news as well, or what some of my colleagues say. There's like too many like fake news or news that is built upon and then the perception. So I think line of communications to better understanding between policy making, for example, from ASEAN and China, the academic community, I think the militaries, and also the business community. It's very much important to have a channels to really understand each other and not let one particular conflict then affect all of the whole relationship. So I think I tremendously agree with that point. And secondly, I think also agree with what Lucio has said in regards to the crisis management. Of course, I think in the CSP document, it's outlined some of the most important channel, the East Asia, the Maritime, the East Asia Summit, and other kind of meetings. But I think what we also should think of is that what happened if there's a crisis happen, if there's like an escalations, for example, in the South China Sea, which channel that we should build upon, because of line of communications is obviously is one of the most important crucial issues to avoid really an escalations to be happening for an open war. And lastly, on your last question, I think it's also very much important. Yeah, I think the rule of law, how we build upon, how we interpret the rule of law here in the region it's very much crucial for building the trust between ASEAN and China relationships. And of course, I think each and every country might have a different kind of interpretation of rule of international law, but in general sense, by respecting the dispute settlement mechanisms and avoiding any act that is inconsistent, for example, with the rule of international law, it's very much important. And also, I think the respect to international law, the respect to UNCLOS, I think it's really created a fundamental trust for the cooperations going forward. So I think how ASEAN and China build upon the relationships based on the act that is complied with the provisions in UNCLOS. I think it's very much important to avoid any unnecessary tension and escalations. And also, of course, there are a lot of opportunity as well to collaborate. I think the mechanisms that is already exist under international law, it's also should be considered as well. For example, like the sharing of resources, how we can still going forward, for example, in the South China Sea by sharing resources, or a joint, for example, a marine scientific research, which all align with international law, which I think it's very much important as a conflict management, and also to reduce tensions in the region. So I think that is really the key on how to build trust and also how to shape the lovable image for both parties.
Thank you, Aristyo. Hello? Yeah. All right. Thanks a lot, Aristyo. I think you touch a very good angles about how you place the international law and also the trust aspect of the relationship. Now, I want to more dive in. As we know, China has emerged. China proposed a very fresh idea of the global security initiative. Lucio and Dato has tabled this before in your previous remarks. I want to know about your first response when you heard about the Global Security Initiative? I'm not talking about the GDI, since this is a political security discussion. I want to talk about the GSI. I'm just wondering about your first thinking, your first thought. What was, crossing your mind when you hear about the Global Security Initiative proposed by Beijing to the world? But I think it's also to China, to ASEAN. I want to start to Dato. Dato, how do you perceive that?
Actually, the proposal reflects China's own confidence of its ability to contribute to global peace. Otherwise, China would not propose it. You see, because a proposal has to be backed by action, by support, and all that. So I think China sees itself now that it's able to provide that, and also the proposal could come because of its own dissatisfaction of the current order that is in existence. So I think it's something that Chinese thinks something much better, something that's more, equitable, that provides, the protection, the security needed all over. Yeah. So I think from that point of view, it's quite difficult for you to reject, because I think it's quite difficult to reject a proposal which calls for peace, peaceful home, peaceful environment, that empowers you to be, comfortable and happy. So I think from the philosophy point of view, is that, then I think secondly now, I think China has to actually gauge this against each individual country sets of conditions, because some countries operate on a different level, and also conditioned by different historical colonial experience. So I think their approach to security will be quite different. So I think they need to be actually, you cannot have one that fits all. You have to really fit into the individual tempo, requirement, and level of development to see how this idea can be actually, accepted. But as general principle, I think is something that I think, if I got it correct, in general, ASEAN is not opposed to such an idea. So of course, the details and the motivation or rationale has to be further studied. Thank you.
Thank you. I think interesting to the GSI shows China's confidence. I think that's a very good point, Dato. Aristyo, how do you perceive it?
All right, so thank you. I hope I have my voice is clear now.
Way much better.
All right, so I think it's all countries. I think we should welcome the ideas of world peace, and I think we should welcome all the ideas of how to avoid conflict and tensions. And I think I agree with what Dato has said, that it shows how China want to confidence in building the world and show leaderships in terms of global security. But of course, I think it not goes without challenge. I think even though in one hand, I think a lot of ASEAN countries and also other countries might also welcome the ideas of the Global Security Initiative. But I think we should not forget one of the fundamental thing about security initiative is I think trust, and how you perceive it. It's very much important. How the image of a country is, I think it's also important. So I think the Global Security Initiative is certainly, I think it's a good step, I think, for China to take leaderships in global peace. But I think we should also tackle to the core problems or the core issues of how all countries should respect first the rule of international law, because without trust, for example, from any other countries, particularly the Southeast Asian states, I think it's might be more challenging, for example, for China to get a lot of support, right? If later on, or if China have a good image and compliance with international law, and they build trust, which they earned trust from Southeast Asia countries, I think it is more likely that country is going to be supporting the GSI. So I think it's of course. So from my perspective, I think it's a really good idea. We always should welcome the ideas for peace, idea to maintain peace and security. But of course, I think in order to really realizing the visions, I think China really to have trust from other countries, particularly Southeast Asia. And so therefore, how China get along in the ongoing conflict, and how China shows leadership and compliance to international law, it certainly create more support from Southeast Asia countries. So with such a huge initiative, I think China fundamentally have to gain trust from Southeast Asia, and compliance to international law is really the key aspect, I think, to get support on that.
Lucio.
Yes, thank you. So the GSI is a new initiative, so expectedly it's big on principles, but still very sparse in terms of details. So this is natural for any initiative. We have seen this with the Belt and Road in its early formative year. Now it's already in its 9th year. We have seen projects breaking ground even despite of the pandemic. So with the GSI, I think again, I agree with Ambassador Dato that this speaks volume about the confidence of China to contribute to security issues. An issue that is traditionally not their forte. They're known for economy, poverty alleviation, and so on. So for China to wait the security issue is already a big, through the GSI proposal. I think one of the controversial, if not a point that really attracted a lot of attention in relation to the GSI is its association with the notion of comprehensive and indivisible security. This idea that the security of one country should not come at the expense of another country's security. Of course, this raises a lot of parallels with what is going on with the Russia-Ukraine war, with, of course, Russia arguing that the unabashed expansion of NATO eastwards, even after the disintegration of the USSR, really pushed Russia to a corner. And when they drew the red line in Ukraine, then the conflict eventually erupted. So this is quite a different perspective and a controversial one of that, given the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. So the attraction of this concept, the openness towards it is there, but of course there's also some concerns, raised especially by countries in the West, because collective security configurations, this has been the defining feature of international security architecture since the Cold War years, and so this idea of indivisible security, in a way, takes a swipe, against collective security, this kind of alliances that China considers directed to third states. So whether this kind of new approach to security, a comprehensive and indivisible security that factors the security of all countries, so this is a novel idea. So let's see how it goes.
Thank you. So we have around 10 minutes left before I open the discussions to all the students here. I want to discuss with three of you about a very simple questions about the blind spot. Since all of us are non-governments, but we do understand how the governments thinks, and also we've been observed all the ASEAN's approach to China. In your opinion, what would be the blind spot of the ASEAN and China in approaching the political security dynamic in the region? What would be your suggestions of blind spot? Things that the government does not see, but actually see it by the civil society. Maybe I want to start. To Lucio first, and then I go to Dato, and then Aristyo. Lucio.
Well, I mentioned earlier about practical areas for cooperation on the non-traditional security front, for instance. So I think access to marine resources, especially fisheries, probably sometime in the future, maybe some openings towards practical joint development in offshore oil and gas, can also be considered. But the fisheries, because this is a gut issue, closer to people's livelihoods. So, and it's also not an issue that always bag the headlines, So I think some kind of understanding, on flashpoints like the South China Sea, ensuring that regardless of jurisdictional disputes, artisanal or traditional fishermen will be able to go about their peaceful, livelihood, doing fishing, will be done without interference, especially from maritime law enforcement agencies of any country. So I think this is an area where disputants can try to agree on. Secondly, I think this proposal for a coordinated and joint fishing ban instead of a unilateral fishing ban. I think this makes a lot of sense. No country in the region does not want to give the environment card, to another country. I mean, everybody wants to replenish naturally, fishing stocks, and of course, so they would support, closed and open seasons for fishing. So this is very critical for especially highly migratory fishes like tuna, for instance. So I think it would be good, a good idea for coastal states in the South China Sea, littoral states to have this, to discuss, a potential for a joint, or coordinated fishing ban, so that everyone will be able to tell their fishermen, to avoid fishing on an agreed specified time during the year. And I think this will ensure better compliance, and I think this will ensure that everybody will be on board the process. So I think these 2 points, are probably could be the start, something tangible, something that can be done. I think on the immediate horizon, especially given the depleting fishing stocks, in the South China Sea. And of course, there have been the recent efforts of claimant states, marine scientists and fisheries experts of the region. For instance, the one that met recently in Manila, I think in September, for the first time, a common fisheries resource analysis was made, and a key commercial fish species, skipjack tuna, was analyzed, by marine scientists from 5 littoral states, China, Vietnam, India, Malaysia. I think Singapore was also there, to take stock of the status of this key commercial fish species, and probably recommend, to authorities how to conserve. And I think conserving this kind of, migratory fish species require trans-border cooperation. So I think these 3 points could be of help.
Thank you, Lucio. Dato, what is the blind spot?
I think basically you have to understand government action is actually determined by the domestic policy. I think government has to take into account of the domestic sentiment in actually managing or trying to resolve issues with on an international or regional level. So I think having said that, I think it's important, I think, for government to have actually the leadership to lead, to convince the domestic audience, whatever it does in terms of the dispute, in terms of actions and proposed action, is something beneficial for the country. It's something beneficial in terms of long term, in terms of a wider perception, or in fact in terms of not necessarily immediate benefit, but long term benefit. Some of the policy framework that we need to actually pass it down to the people, so they understand why certain action is taken. Whenever I think we have some dispute or some issues with neighboring country, let be on sovereignty, let be on natural resources dispute, or even question of border, cross-border issues. Then thirdly, I think we should remember all government actually is very sensitive. That is not perceived as a weak government versus dealing with foreign issues. Then I think then it will lose a popular support. So this is something also we need to balance. So I think in addressing the so-called blind spots, the ASEAN and China, I think we need to understand the dynamics, what determines government policies or action.
I think you raised a very important analysis in the domestic level. I think that's a very good point. Thank you, Dato. Aristyo, how about you?
I was just about to say one of a couple of potential blind spot that we should take into account. I think the first, I think it's back to Dato's point. I think the public perceptions or the domestic perceptions towards China, I think it's also very much important. I think we all have several issues, so to speak. For example, in the case of Indonesia, we're not a claimant in the South China Sea, but South China Sea very much in the public discourse, and also the Chinese workers or any other image. So I think that's something that the government, all domestic ASEAN governments should be taking into account and should really observe on how the public perceptions view. So this is, I'm sure that should be taken into account, for example, before they make or engage the foreign policy towards China. So domestic perceptions, I think it's really something that all the government should also taking into account. Also, and educate, right? So on one hand, consider the public perceptions, but also on the other hand, giving like knowledge and what would be the best solutions for each and every issues. And second, which I think I'm not quite sure if we can consider it as a blind spot in a sense, but I think if we observe, for example, the AUKUS, I think it's also in issues that which Southeast Asia might look very close up to, because I know it's we have seen a quite different policy from Southeast Asian countries toward AUKUS, but of course on the issues, I think I share the same concern with the Indonesian government. The issue is not really whether or not we feel threatened by AUKUS, but how China and AUKUS have a relationship. So I think it might not directly have a implication to Southeast Asia, but of course how later on China responds to AUKUS, on how this upcoming years, on how AUKUS is the realizations. I think it's also something that we have to consider, because we cannot really control. We're not part of AUKUS, obviously, but of course the tensions that might come up from AUKUS or as a result of AUKUS, which really have influence in Southeast Asia. So we also have to very looking at this very carefully at the moment.
Thank you. I think we have displayed a very good exposures of insights from the three speakers. Now I would like to open a round of question and answer. So before that, I want to tell that I want to open 2 rounds. So the first round is 3 questions, and then another round of 3 questions. Please identify yourself and then your country and also your questions, and please identify this question goes to who. Now I'll go to Rota first from Cambodia, please.
Okay, my name is Himrathai. I'm from Cambodia, and I really insightful to listen all the speakers. So I have 3 questions, if I may.
Could you limit it to 1, because a very limited. So yeah.
All right. So so 1 question then. So I heard all speaker mention a little bit about the Mekong issues. So so from all of your perspective, how should ASEAN and China work together to manage this case? Thank you.
Thank you. And then I'll go to, I think, go to Odom. No, I think, no, we have already Cambodia 1. I want to go to the Philippines first. I think, Tovel, please.
Hello, is my voice clear?
Very good, please.
Okay, first, thank you so much for the wide perspectives that the speakers have took in this comprehensive strategic partnership. My specific question is about the maritime security implementation, especially with regards to the territorial waters. So my question is, how do we reconcile the many different claims that ASEAN countries have on the South China Sea, as well as the fishing bans that China has imposed every year towards the maritime navigation in Philippines and Vietnam in certain areas of the South China Sea, and how will this factor into the comprehensive strategic partnership as to in terms of enforcing clearer maritime law enforcement? Thank you. That's my question.
Thank you. Last question from Natasha, Indonesia.
Thank you, Calvin, for the opportunity. Hello, my name is Natasha from Indonesia. I would like to address my question specifically to Dato Abdul Majid. Thank you so much, Dato, for your insights. In your statement, I recall that you mentioned how ASEAN should not alienate other strategic partners in managing its political security issues. However, to my best knowledge, there has been a consistent difference between ASEAN and China on how they should go about involving other countries in certain disputes or even in certain cooperation frameworks, especially those of extra-regional powers. And I think that it is really relevant to the issue about how China sees ASEAN's involvement in other security frameworks, as previously also mentioned by Mr. Aristyo. My question would be, Dato, how do you think China and ASEAN can find the middle ground about the issue? Thank you.
Thank you. So we have 3 questions from Cambodia, Philippines, and Indonesia. I think to the interest of the time, I want to divide this. I think for Mekong issue, I would invite Dato. You can answer, and also the questions of the middle ground. Dato, please, you can address the questions.
I think I'll answer on the question of the middle ground, on this, how China views, ASEAN's arrangement with other security forums. I think from my understanding, China basically itself does not object. I think the Chinese opposition will mainly, if such an arrangement is aimed against China or have a strategic interest of actually, containing China, I think that will be an issue. Otherwise, I think China is quite open, because China itself also has some, arrangement with other countries, other friendly countries, So I think that's why I think we need to be sensitive when we have actually, for example, Malaysia, we have be against any security alliances, even from the day of SETO, in the early 70s, because it will not be too healthy if you have been a member of an alliance that is actually openly aimed against another party. I think being a small country, that is not very healthy. So I think that's my answer about this, security framework vis-a-vis China, and also ASEAN having other relationship. On the Mekong issue, I think in the early stage, from my understanding, there was this, feeling when China became active on the Mekong issue. It was seen as a very decisive action, because they were thinking that China was trying to split ASEAN into the Mekong, countries, and also the rest of ASEAN, So there was this fear: is China moving towards that? I've always taken the issue. I don't think so. I think this Mekong issue is it's quite complicated, and it's also quite sensitive. I would venture perhaps all these affected countries which knows the issue better, perhaps have to work out with some model that actually can satisfy both sides. And I think China also has to be sensitive to actually, if you stay in the upper floor of a condominium, I think you also have to be sensitive, to those people at the lower end of the condominium, so that there'll be a quite healthy environment to live for all the residents. So that's my general comment.
Thank you, Dato. On the South China Sea, I want to invite Lucio and also Aristyo to have a comment. Maybe Lucio can go first.
Yeah, so this is a difficult issue. Maritime territorial issues are always difficult. So that's why earlier I said, in relation to fishing, I suggest that to spare fishermen of jurisdictional disputes and allow them to fish freely, as they have been doing for generations. So access to traditional fishing grounds should be sacrosanct, and no especially traditional fishermen should be allowed to conduct their livelihood free from intimidation or coercion. And in relation to the fishing ban, I encourage, really very supportive of the idea of a joint and coordinated fishing ban, so that the environmental card will not be used by just one country, and instead all littoral states, will be able to project, that they support the natural replenishment of fishing stocks. So they're allowing this measure to keep, to conserve fishing stocks, for posterity's sake.
Thank you, Lucio. Aristyo, what do you think? And also you can touch upon about the Mekong issue if you want.
Right. So, a very quick point. I think, yeah, maritime boundaries, the limitations and maritime issues is always sensitive for all countries. I think for a regular, not a regular maritime issues for two countries, I think it's already be very complicated. And for the South China Sea, I think it's also more and more complicated. So I think a couple of ways that we, Southeast Asia, ASEAN and China, can going forward. I think first, of course, is the South China Sea Code of Conduct. I think that's still arguably the best way from my perspective, for ASEAN and China to build trust and also to create a good relationships in order to so many things, collaborations, knowledge sharings, joint activities. So I think the Code of Conduct will still remain the important document. And then the second one, of course, I think I also welcome the ideas of cooperations, joint cooperations, for example, as mentioned earlier by Lucio, fisheries management cooperations. I think the protections of environment, the marine scientific research, for example, in activities that is, I think, less sensitive. I think ASEAN and China should also start to explore on that issues. And I think I would agree and disagree a little bit with what Lucio has said. I think we should, I think all of the fishermen, the traditional fishermen, should still catching fish as they used to be. But let's not using the term of traditional fishing ground, because it's not recognized under international law. There is a terminology of traditional fishing rights, but it's quite different. So I would say that, of course, a collective and collaborations, I think it's of course very much important. If later on, for example, we cannot really collaborate in a very sensitive issues like fisheries or mining, etc., Southeast Asia, ASEAN and China can start it from collaboration in the issues that is less sensitive. For example, the issue of marine scientific research, or the environmental protections issues, or any other issues, on safety of navigation issues that is less and less tensions or less sensitive. I think we can start it from there, and then see how more possible cooperations can be going forward. But of course, I think the main thing or like what should we face now is, of course, the negotiation of the Code of Conduct, and hopefully that we can see that in the upcoming years.
Thank you. Thank you, Rizka. Now I want to let's open up another round. Open up another round. Maybe let's start from Andre.
Thank you. I think my question would be a little bit more specific. How about the countries like the Philippines, and whereas there are laws before as a remnant of colonization, such as partnership with Western countries and say the US, having tensions with China, how do we reconcile, or the CSP would move forward with these kinds of laws in place, such as the, say, Visiting Force Agreement and Mutual Defense Treaty? And does this add to the tension? And how do we best to have this sort of cooperation and lessen the tension and have a more stable region, especially given the context that has been happening, say, in Taiwan and the waters of Southeast Asia? Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I want to move to Ying Tung Xiao from China, please.
Hi, everyone. Thanks very much for the inspiring discussion. So my question is a bit like not so specific concerning like the South China Sea issue or the Mekong issue. It's kind of actually pretty general. So I was wondering, as recent years, ASEAN has been taking this like regionalistic stance in terms of like putting ASEAN centrality as a I wouldn't say priority, but like a focus point in terms of its bilateral biangular relations with China or other regions, especially demonstrated in the RCEP. Like there's a strong focus of ASEAN centrality. So I was wondering, is this ASEAN centrality a reality in terms of security issues? Which is to say, are ASEAN countries taking a unified stance while they all have like very different interests, not only with China, but also among themselves? And if it is a reality, how is it changing the dynamics of the ASEAN-China security dialogue? Thank you.
Interesting. Ravin, please.
Okay, good morning. Thank you for the chance to ask the question. So my question is that in academic circles, there's almost a consensus, or at least a very strong arguments, that ASEAN countries tend to be reluctant in pursuing security and military, especially traditional security cooperations with other sovereign states. And this is because of their history with colonialism and their distrust with other sovereign states. Would you think that it is possible for ASEAN, especially as ASEAN countries, to cooperate in a traditional security fashion with China in this context? Because it has been seen through history that even with other ASEAN countries, ASEAN members tend to be reluctant to pursue a higher degree of cooperation in this area, except maybe for non-traditional security threats, such as against drugs or against terrorism and things like that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ravin. Now, I think I want to start with the most interesting part about the questions: is ASEAN centrality is reality on terms of security? Now, I think I want to go first to Aristyo and then Dato and also Lucio in regards to this question. You also feel free to touch the two other questions in the way you are answering these questions. Aristyo.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. Indeed, it's very interesting questions. It has been discussing a lot. I think also ASEAN centrality was reflected in the ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific, right? But then the big question is how to really implement the ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific, right? So the ASEAN centrality actually has been questions what meant by the ASEAN centrality, right? I had a conversations I think a few weeks ago with Ambassador Rizal Sukma from CSIS, and he would argue that ASEAN centrality is basically illusions. So there's no such thing like ASEAN centrality. What more important for ASEAN is not centrality, but relevance. How ASEAN make itself a relevance amidst the geopolitical rivalry, for example. So I think the concept of ASEAN centrality itself, I think there has been a few interpretations of what the ASEAN centrality should be. And in regards in particular on how ASEAN centrality in the security cooperations, I think it's also very interesting because what I interpret ASEAN centrality is that ASEAN and the center, ASEAN set the agenda, right? What we want, what cooperation that we want to do, etc. Right? But of course, one of the biggest challenge for ASEAN centrality, if you use that as the term of ASEAN centrality, is going to be the budget, right? Because all of the ASEAN's cooperations, the budget is not really from ASEAN, right? It's from the partner. So when we not, I think Andrew Mantong from CSIS have a report on that as well. How can we try to maintain centrality when we are depending the budget on our partner? Can we really decide it on the agenda to maintain centrality when the budget is not from us? Like those kind of things. So I think it's really one of the homework or an issues that I think in the middle of how we ensure centrality here in ASEAN. But I think I would definitely agree with Pa Rizal that the most important thing it's not really how to interpret the centrality, what kind of centrality, but how to make ASEAN still relevant. And the second one, I think the cooperation on non-traditional security. I think this is also a very interesting one because I think if we go through ASEAN, well, actually, I don't think that all ASEAN countries have the common positions on responding to non-traditional security cooperations with other countries. Of course, I think if we see the context of Philippines, of course, they historically also have a very strong security relationship with the US, if I'm not mistaken. So I think, and also different countries. So I think in regards to non-traditional security, I would say some ASEAN countries might have a different positions in receiving the non-traditional security cooperations with extra regional power, for example. But in the case of Indonesia, I think if we historically go back, I think Indonesia is always cautious with extra regional power here in the region. So I think that is the issues. We have a different perceptions towards non-traditional security cooperations. Or I think it's also reflect on how Southeast Asia countries receive the AUKUS, right? So there might be a diverging response to how Southeast Asia. So what I would suggest is that instead of like having like a direct or defense cooperations alliance or agreement, so to speak, why don't we try more on like the softer part, like joint exercises, for example, creating a mutual trust between countries. So I think that is much more relevant instead of like creating a defense pact or like a treaty defense alliance. So I think we should more focus on the possibilities, some aspect that is we can join together. So for example, for like joint exercises, I think it's less sensitive and certainly possible to be conducted from ASEAN with other countries.
Thank you. Dato.
I agree to all the points mentioned by Aristyo. I think first on the question of ASEAN centrality, I think it's an emotional thing. I think for ASEAN, we feel very happy, we feel very honored, but I think we are still weak. So the issue is that how do we actually use this anchor that has been conferred or maybe recognized upon us? So I think we must show strength, we must show creativity, we must show innovative in trying to formulate, the conflicting ideas, so that the centrality can become as a platform of solution provider, or at least conflict prevention, or also tension lessening when conflict arises. That also can serve as ASEAN centrality rather than ASEAN itself putting up, a force or as a muscle man to really command all the issues. So if we can play this role, then I think that will be sufficient for us, or to remain relevant. So I think in this case, it's important for us actually to really strengthen our inner, cooperation. I think one of the weaknesses of ASEAN over the years has been this difficulty of reaching consensus on practically all issues. We have so much functional cooperation from the dialogue partner, but to start a project, it takes 10 years, 15 years, because different, ASEAN countries have different view on that project. So I think I my experience with the Chinese, they really feel very, puzzled about this consensus making in ASEAN. We say we have so much fun to give to you, but so difficult to start a project, So I think the inner strength, I don't know whether you need a leadership, you need better mechanism, better organization, something that I think we should look into, Because it's important to have this anchor of this, recognition of ASEAN centrality, though it's still what some say is hollow or whatever it is, but at least if there is this anchor, it's important. And also on the question of military alliances, I think the way to go about it is what we have been doing now, to start on the more softer, comfortable way of joint exercise, exchange of military personnel, training in other defense college, This will create, I think, that confidence level, that trust level, which we can scale up as time goes on. Thank you.
Thank you. Lucio.
So yeah, I agree with to all the points raised by my, of course, the two seniors. So I think ASEAN centrality, the greater calls or talks about ASEAN centrality is a function of growing concern, about extra-regional, meaning non-Southeast Asian unilateral initiatives on the security front, be they the AUKUS, be they the Quad. So I think ASEAN all the more feel concerned about losing relevance, losing weight, losing its convening power, losing its central role in charting the regional security architecture. But we also see, efforts by dialogue partners, whether it's the U.S., Indo-Pacific strategy, saying Southeast Asia is at the heart of the Indo-Pacific, and therefore they support the centrality of ASEAN. And of course, partners like China, other dialogue partners of ASEAN, have been making rhetorical statements supporting ASEAN centrality. So there's a lot of importance to that concept, because But at the same time, of course, there are difficulties to that because these are, in a sense, 10 heads, 10 individual countries that have their own dynamics with different dialogue partners of ASEAN. So, for instance, some ASEAN countries have more robust relations with the US, or others will have more deeper, more intertwined relations with China. So it's always difficult to reach consensus, especially when the great powers clash. And probably I'll tie this up to the question on the alliances, Biandre. So I think in a perfect world, the Philippines-China or ASEAN-China relations should be taken on their own terms, meaning that their value should not be diminished or increased relative to third parties. But again, the reality, the relations of countries, it also matters, to third states, especially countries which feel that they may be adversely affected, by any security developments or alliance activities being conducted, by two or more countries. So I think that the challenge for the Philippines, especially in relation to its long-standing treaty alliance with the US dating back 51 and subsequent military pacts like the 1999 Visiting Forces Agreement and the 2014 Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement. I think the challenge for the alliance is, for the Philippines in particular, is how to ensure that the country will not be dragged into a US-China conflict, whether it's in the South China Sea or increasingly more pressing, the Taiwan Strait. So whether the alliance is an asset or a liability because of increasing competition between US and China, China being a close neighbor, the biggest trading partner, US a security ally. So the Philippines will be put between a place in a hard rock. And I don't think any country in Southeast Asia would want to exchange places with the Philippines. So I think these are difficult conversations to make. And I wish the leadership in Manila to have the foresight, and of course all the wisdom that they need, to manage relations with two important players.
Thank you, Lucio. That concludes our sessions. Let's give a big hand to all the three panelists. We managed to have a very productive, insightful conversations, which is, I also regarded this a very difficult conversations. And I hope that all the students here managed to jot down a lot of good points on how we should see the political security relationship between ASEAN and China. I personally very optimistic with the ASEAN-China relationship. Go ahead. I reiterating what Dato said about if we look on the 30 years back, right? ASEAN and China relationship was full of a question mark, but now it's been developed to way much more confident and way much more trust in it. Although we need to, I think, not to renewing, but to upgrade our trust, right? A bit, not only to China, but also China to us. I think that's another levels, and I hope the CSP can helps us to facilitate us to that point. And I think this is also a good moment for all you, the students. And I know tomorrow you will present to the public about your joint recommendations. And I think political security is the most important aspect, most sensitive, but you should be there how you approach this in a very constructive manner. And I think the openness of ASEAN people and also the openness of the Chinese peoples are very important. And I think this can be reflected by tomorrow joint recommendations. So thank you very much. I want to say thank you to Dato. Thank you, Dato, for your making this time. Thank you to Aristyo. Thank you to Lucio. I know in Manila and Kuala Lumpur, it's supposed to be makan siang, Pak. It's supposed to be lunch. Thank you for making this. And Aristyo, also thank you. And I'll make sure that the joint recommendation will be handed also to you, so you can see how this young selected Southeast Asians see the future of ASEAN-China relationship. Thank you very much. My name is Calvin Ko. See you in the next program of FPCI. And for those of you, please enjoy the rest of the China Policy Lab. Thank you, Aristyo, Dato, Lucio.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Terima kasih.
Lucio.
Bye-bye.
Back to you, Brigitta.
Thank you once again to Calvin Ko, Director of Research and Analysis of FPCI, who moderated this discussion. Really great, and hopefully it can give more insights for all the participants who will have a good discussion and dialogue after this lunch meeting. So once again, thank you for the three panelists, Dato Abdul Majid, President of Malaysia-China Friendship Association, and then Lucio Blanco Pitlo III, Research Fellow at the Asia Pacific Pathways to Progress Foundation, and Aristyo Darmawan, lecturer in international law at Universitas Indonesia. Thank you, all of you, and of course, our great moderator today, Calvin Ko, for the fruitful discussion this afternoon. We hope that the panel discussion will give insight and knowledge to the participant and to contribute to joint conversation. With this, the Policy Lab has been officially opened, ladies and gentlemen, and special thanks to His Excellency Ambassador Teng Shijun, Ambassador of the People's Republic of China to ASEAN, and Dr. Dino Patijala, who were opened our great moment this morning. I wish everyone have a good productive discussion, and I hope the 2 days agenda will go smoothly. Don't forget to follow or subscribe to FPCI social media handles for more information about our activities and upcoming events and program. Once again, thank you for you all who joined in Zoom and of course who joined in YouTube, our opening ceremony today, ASEAN-China Policy Lab titled Filling in the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership. Thank you once again so much for tuning in.